Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 224th New Social Environment. I am Nick Bennett, the Special Projects Editor here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Nouriel Roubini and Paul D. Miller, aka DJ Spooky. We're also thrilled to have the poet Alex Cuff here, who will read to close today's program. And to begin, I ask you all to join me in acknowledging the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters on which we stand. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprisings in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAdie, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Toyin Salau, Walter Wallace Jr., and countless others we have lost to white supremacy and police violence in this country, and acknowledge that justice will come from the streets, from the nation demanding accountability and refusing to move on until Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the state. Before I introduce today's guest and host, please join me for a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce our guest of the day. Nouriel Roubini is a professor of economics at New York University's Stern School of Business. He is also a CEO. He's also the CEO of Roubini Macro Associates, LLC, a global macroeconomic consultancy firm here in New York, as well as co-founder of Rosa and Roubini Associates based out of London. Prior to joining Stern, he was on the faculty of Yale University's Department of Economics, and he has published numerous theoretical, empirical, and policy papers on international macroeconomic issues, as well as co-authored several books. Our host today, composer, multimedia artist, and writer Paul D. Miller, aka DJ Spooky, makes work that immerses audiences in a blend of genres, global culture, and environmental and social issues. Miller has collaborated with an array of recording artists, including Metallica, Chuck D, Steve Reich, and Yoko Ono. His 2018 album DJ Spooky Presents Phantom Dance Hall debuted at #3 on Billboard Reggae. He is an editor-at-large of the Brooklyn Rail. And without further ado, Paul, handing the mic over to you.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. I'm hoping you're enjoying the snow. I kind of enjoy it just because it reminds me that climate change is still radically altering our weather patterns, but we can still have a little bit of fun. I went out for a long walk this morning in the snow. It was great. All right, so me and Nouriel go back a couple years, and I'm a huge fan of his work, mainly from the viewpoint that he's one of these people like Yuval Harari that is able to synthesize between radically different perspectives about how economics and kind of the basic fabric of society intersects with some of the sort of fracture points of how people make choices and decisions. He was one of the first major economists to accurately sort of engage the financial crisis of 2008, which if many of you remember, some of you are millennials, so I always want to remind everybody, there was a time before 2015. And he also throws wild and really fun parties. So many friends of mine, when I told them I was going to be doing a dialogue, they're like, is it a party? Are there going to be hot models? And I was like, well, maybe, who knows? But so Nouriel, I want to just kind of riff with you for a moment, if I may. I want to show you a couple of things. Just recently, we had the Battle of Capitol Hill on January 6, 2021. And one of the rioters actually had this crazy white privilege card, and he said the police couldn't arrest him. So he literally pulled out this white privilege card, and the credit card numbers are 045, which is the 45th president. And the police laughed at him and still arrested him. But I thought it was really wild that he would use a kind of a fake credit card of white privilege. And as an artist, I'm intrigued when people play with these ideas of misinformation, disinformation, and of course, propaganda. But like credit card propaganda for white privilege was pretty amusing. Then I was thinking of some of the like recent protests and riots and stuff. And then thinking of the tensions of the 1960s and the radical kind of reallocation of resources, the 1960s, because a lot of the people who had been better educated by World War II's GI Bill that allowed people to get education were still students of the Roosevelt theories of economics, of the Works Progress Administration, and what President Johnson called the Great Society. So economics has always allowed people to kind of re-engage society at large, but of course there's always these radical tensions that disrupt how we think about things. And you're kind of a master of disruption. So I want to just kind of go back to some of these issues about the way economics conditioned American society and some of the crisis points we're facing. Obviously, this is one of the most famous images of that time. And of course, now if we update a mashup of Mona Lisa, Da Vinci's most iconic image, this is a little fun mashup remix here. But we're at a crisis of civilizations and a crisis of biopolitics. And one thing I wanted to riff with you about is the way economics and perception intersect. Now, you're working on a new book, and one of your most famous books is called Crisis Economics. Do you want to talk about your new book for a second?
Yes, my last book was about the global financial crisis and also economic and financial crisis in the past. It was about 10 years ago. It was a New York Times bestseller. But now I'm thinking about how the world is going to change in the next, I would say, 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I realized that there are a whole bunch of real mega threats that imperil our future, and I identified 10 of them. And if we don't do anything about them, we're going to destroy our economies, our societies, our environment, our politics, our geopolitics. So it's a bit of an ambitious book because my last book was about something I know everything inside out, that is economic and financial crisis. Well, this book is not just about the economy, it's about the disruptions that are going to come from artificial intelligence, robotic automation, about the threats that are coming from big tech, about global climate change, about pandemics, about the backlash against liberal democracy and populism, about the geopolitical conflicts and the coming Cold War between the US and China, is about the deglobalization and fragmentation of the global economy, is about lots of other things that are usually in separate silos. Yes, there are books about global climate change or pandemics or the future of AI and jobs or politics or geopolitics or democracy and economic crisis. The ambition of this book is going to be to put together essentially 10 separate threats to our future. And I define them as 10 deadly Ds or disruptions that can affect our futures. One is the rise of debt, deficits, and the risk of defaults by governments and the private sector. The second one is demographic aging in advanced economies and in emerging markets that reduces potential growth and makes implicit debts even more big. Unfunded liability from pension systems, social security, healthcare. The third one is the risk of deflation and debt deflation, that there is a rise in the real value of nominal debts when you have a deflation and prices and wages are falling. The fourth one is the risk of debasement of fiat currencies, as we have central banks printing money to finance large budget deficits, to fight deflation in the short run, but risking to cause inflation or stagflation, that is recession and inflation like the 70s in the medium term. Then there's the digital disruptions that are coming from AI, robotic automation. They're going to lead to technological unemployment and a rise even further of income and wealth inequality. There is a sixth, the phenomenon of deglobalization and decoupling and balkanization and of fragmentation of the global economy, as everybody's trying to protect their own firms and their own workers. Then there is a seventh, democracy backlash and the rise of populism of the extreme right or the extreme left in some cases, and the backlash about liberal democracy, rule of law, and freedom. Then there is the phenomenon of the duopolistic strategic rivalries between US and its own rivals, especially between US and China. A Cold War that is becoming a colder war and may lead even to a risk of a hot war. And the last two are the digital rivalries that are leading to the conflicts of the future being cyber warfare rather than conventional wars. And in this sense, big tech is becoming part of the national security industrial complex. That's why we're not going to break them up, because China is using Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu as a tool of foreign statecraft. And we're going to use also Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on as a tool of economic policy and foreign national security policy. And the final one is what I call deadly, man-made disasters, because global climate change is not a natural disaster, it's a man-made disaster because of greenhouse gas emission. And even pandemics are not a natural disaster, but they're man-made, because there is now evidence that shows that zoonotic diseases that are transferred from animal and humans have to do with the destruction of the animal ecosystems. As we destroy these animal ecosystems, these animals that carry some of these pathogens like bats, pangolins, are closer to livestock, are closer to human beings, and we have more and more of these deadly diseases. After all, in the last 30 years, we had first HIV, SARS, MERS, swine flu, bird flu, Zika, Ebola, now COVID-19. It's going to be a matter of time until we have COVID-21, 22, and so on. So the fact that these pandemics are occurring more frequently and more virulently has to do with global climate change. So global climate change and deadly pandemics are not natural disasters, they are man-made disasters. So these are the 10 deadly disruptions that can destroy our future. Of course, there are solutions. We don't have to be doomed as a planet. We don't have to doom for a nuclear winter or cyber warfare or conflicts or war, but those are risks that are rising. And that's why I'm looking for the next 10 years and what can go wrong and what can we do about preventing these total disasters from occurring. So it's pretty ambitious, because it's a holistic thing that connects 10 different strands that are economic, social, political, geopolitical, health, technological, and otherwise into one strand. So that's the ambition of this new book.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible synthesis that you've already, I mean, because of your predictions of the 2008 financial crisis, I mean, those were really very deep structural analysis of sort of the digitization of finance and the way that finance and stuff like credit default swaps, there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on right now, like GameStop. I'm sure you've heard about that. And
yep.
It was fascinating because hedge funds, I mean, say for example, like Harvard, I want to make sure that everyone realizes we're in an arts conversation here, but arts is intimately tied to perception. So when people perceive markets, for example, if you perceive a stock going up, more and more people start buying it and it drives the price up. So what's been going on, say for example, with GameStop, just to give the audience a little bit of background, it's a multi-billion-dollar situation where the stock was worth about $17 a week ago, but these kids on Reddit started just hyping it on the platform, and all these hedge fund guys had shorted the stock by betting that it would go down, but it went up. And so it's now cost all these hedge funds something like $50 billion because these kids on Reddit were hyping it. But the funny thing is that's kind of the art form of perception. And Nouriel, one thing that's always intrigued me about your work is that you're able to really be kind of like that Renaissance kind of sensibility. Like if you look at Cosimo the Medici, for example, the way they made their money was banking. And they helped start our original sort of sense of banking and finance. Now, amusingly enough, they were wild guys, and they also became popes, and they also bought a lot of art. So, I mean, you know, and they throw wild parties too, come to think of it. So you have a good legacy going here. Do you want to riff on that? I mean, because each of the topics you just talked about, we could actually do a conversation on just one of them. But here we are in the era of biopolitics, vaccine nationalism, where different countries are buying up the vaccine, for example, and that creates, again, shortages. And I was reading a really interesting article that you worked with Janet Yellen,
yep.
Who's now going to be in charge of the sort of major financial institutions. Do you want to talk about some of your time? Because you're also Iranian and Jewish, and I was hoping that maybe we could riff on some of your legacy of diaspora as well, because you've made that part of your perception and identity as well. And by the way, there's this lunatic Marjorie Taylor Greene who thinks that Jews have lasers in space. I don't know if you've been hearing this one. And they're causing forest fires. So Jews in space. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't even know where to start. You know, my background is absolutely, as you point out, very eclectic, and that's why I'm comfortable in any society, any culture. You know, before COVID, I used to spend half of my time traveling around the world. Actually, my last trip before COVID, I was away for 5 weeks, in 4 continents with a carry-on, and anywhere from Mumbai, where the temperature was 90 degrees, all the way to Davos for the World Economic Forum, where there was sub-freezing temperature. So I feel at home everywhere because, I was born in Istanbul, Turkey. When I was a year old, we went back to Iran, where my family is Iranian Jewish. By the age of 3, I was in Israel, in Tel Aviv. By the age of 4, we moved to Milano. And finally, we settled in Milan. I grew up there, but I was traveling all over Europe. I was going to see my relatives in Israel and Iran, and you name it. So I've always grown up in a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multi-societal thing. And I feel, today the globalism seems like a dirty word because there is a backlash against globalism and return to nationalism. But I feel a true globalist in a true sense of it, because I feel that every culture, every humanity, every history, every art, every ethnicity, every religion, every race has something to contribute to humanity. And at the end of the day, whether white, black, brown, or yellow, it doesn't matter. We're human. We have a common heritage genetically and a common set of values as well. So I'm a little bit worried about this backlash against democracy, this nationalistic backlash, this inward-oriented kind of policy about protecting just your own people, your own firms, your own worker, because we're in a united world. And the problem we're facing, financial crisis, global climate change, pandemic, geopolitical threats, cannot be resolved at the national level. We need global governance. We need cooperation among countries. Otherwise, we're going to destroy this planet, whether through global climate change or a nuclear winter or cyber warfare or another pandemic. So I'm a true globalist in the best sense of the word. And I'm proud of it. In a world, everybody's becoming nationalist. Everybody's becoming a tribe. Everybody's becoming their own clan. And they want to defend their own little small interest, not realizing that, that it's a zero-sum game, if you put it that way. If you think that my win is your loss and vice versa, well, there are solutions that are positive sum game that can improve humanity across borders, across geographies, across economic groups, and so on. So that's in that sense, I'm a true globalist and a true internationalist.
So, I mean, and the fun part about what you were just saying, I mean, I love hearing your story about being a part of this sort of diaspora, and the way that, if the weird thing about right now nationalism and the way that people are looking for victims, say for example, the QAnon stuff is thinking like the Rothschilds and it's very parallel to what happened to Germany during the Weimar Republic. And what's interesting to me about that is that they used propaganda and were able to create a radical financial tension. I'm sure you've studied, the hyperinflation during the Weimar Republic. Do you have any sense of the way the arts can help with the pandemic economy? Because the reason I was very intrigued with when Roosevelt set up the Works Progress Administration to help get out of the Great Depression, many people think of Keynesian economics as this kind of classical model to help an economy recover from crisis. And the artists were given money to make paintings, to write books. All sorts of people were given money just to be creative, and it really helped the economy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it will be a great idea. Absolutely. During the Great Depression, funding was made available for artists, not just in US, Diego Rivera in Mexico, these amazing murals. If you've been to Mexico City, they were the equivalent of some of those murals were made in the United States, even in Rockefeller Center, showcasing, the working class and what they were doing about resolving the Great Depression. Unfortunately, for a long time, the National Endowment for the Arts was being cut off with funding. And under Trump, things have become even worse. And during this recession last year, there was money given to pretty much everybody, private sector, businesses, and you name it, but very little money for nonprofits. Things are changing. And I think that the Biden administration is going to provide money, because take New York City. It's a city that is based on creative classes and visual and performing artists. And most of them have lost their income, have lost their jobs, have left the city. But that's what makes New York unique and special, whether it's performing artists, visual artists, creative people of one sort or another. The only one who can afford now stay in the city are those who work directly for tech companies. But these tech companies actually need the creative classes to do more innovative stuff. So I think that actually we absolutely, and I'm going to recommend it. Janet Yellen was my boss when she was the head of the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House during the Clinton administration. I worked for a year with her, and then I moved to Treasury and worked with Larry Summers. After that, she became chairman of the Fed, and now she's head of the Treasury. I think it would be an excellent idea to make sure there is money given to nonprofits and creative people. 2 weekends ago, I had a Shabbat dinner at home, and Wynton Marsalis came, and he played music for a few minutes, songs and so on. And he himself told me that while he's the most recognized and successful jazzman in the world, he's the head of the Lincoln Jazz Orchestra, he said they haven't been able to perform his team for a year, and he's under financial trouble himself. So he's the number one, and he's under financial trouble. And I'm going to support him by doing a fundraiser at my home for him. And I'm happy to contribute to a fundraiser, but these artists need also money coming from the public sector. They cannot just rely on the private sector, because now there is less money in the private sector available to support a variety of nonprofits, because lots of money is going for the pandemic, for the sick people, for the hospitals. So less money is right now to those who need it, that are artists and creative people. So I'm happy to do my share, but I think it's a key role of the government to make sure that the creative arts, because by creative arts are actually the kind of nourishment that makes sure that the technological innovation that are occurring are going to be more creative than otherwise. Because it's not just about technology. Technology is based on content, and then content has to be created by true artists. And it's the link between art and technology that makes us actually a successful economy and society the way we are. But we've forgotten about the role of the creative people and the artists. So we need it, absolutely. Like during the Great Depression, it's a must, it's necessary. Otherwise, we're going to lose a huge amount of talent, a huge amount of human capital, and it's going to make us less productive, less creative, less innovative. And the future is all based on human capital, knowledge, and innovation. And for that one, we need artists.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, I remember, so I introduced you to Antoine, and Antoine is best friends with Winton. So and
Antoine brought Winton to my place. So
yeah.
It's always 1 degree of separation. Thanks for the connection.
So I got
Antoine, amazing artist himself. He's a trumpeter and he's a pupil of Winton. So incredible guys, absolutely.
I got a text message saying Wynton Marsalis is playing in Nouriel's living room. Whoa.
He's going to do it again. So make sure I invite you when Winton comes back, and we'll do also a fundraiser for him. He's such an amazing guy. By the way, he's a true intellectual. You can speak for hours about politics and geopolitics and about economy and about Black Lives Matter. And the views of Winton's are really fascinating in many ways. And I would say out of consensus also about how the Democratic Party really lost the working classes and lost the people that are supposed to be supporting him. Yeah, so it's interesting insights from Winton. He's really, like, great artists are always embedded in their own times. Picasso painted Guernica, and he was always involved with the issues of his own times. And great artists, even if they don't do political art, have to live their own times and understand the society, the politics, the events, because otherwise they cannot do great art. So great art is always directly, indirectly affected by society and what happens in society.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting moment, because I think people are really having to rethink their relationship to the macroeconomic situation. And what's eerie about that is most Americans think on a very short term. They don't, the idea of long term, what you're looking at is like a kind of a long-term view of society. We're in the most quantified era in human history. The numbers are clear. We have all sorts of indications. But at the same time, you have the rise of QAnon. You have the rise of all these kinds of people who are delusional, like I said, this congresswoman who thinks that Jews have lasers in space.
They're total lunatics. But as you said, it's a repeat of what happened in the 30s. In the 30s, they blamed first the Jews, then the Gypsy, then the Black people, then other minorities, and only the pure Aryans, and now it's white supremacists, were considered as being superior, and it led to the Holocaust. And not just Jews being killed, but gypsies and blacks and gay people and so on. And we have the same literally neo-Nazi mentality among these right-wing militia. They are no different from neo-Nazi, these people. Have the same kind of racial white supremacy kind of views that the Aryans and the Nazi had. And today they hate the Jews, and they claim the Jews are behind conspiracy. They hate Black people, they hate Hispanics, the bad hombres, they hate minorities, they hate Asian people, they hate trans people, gay people, lesbian people. So it's just repeat. And usually when the economy is not going well, you have to find somebody who is going to be at fault, and it's always some minority. Sartre once said, if the Jews did not exist, the anti-Semite would invent the Jews. Be not the Jews, but it'll be the Black or the gay or the Gypsy. So you always find some minority and you blame it for your own economic and social sorrow. It's happened over and over again. So the risk is that this democracy backlash is going to lead to right-wing nationalist government coming to power. Look at what we had. We had Putin in Russia, Orban in Hungary, Maduro in Venezuela, Bolsonaro in Brazil, and so on, and Boris Johnson in the UK. So whether it's advanced economies or emerging markets, whether it's Trump or Salvini in Italy, there are these right-wing populists that are very aggressive, very chauvinistic, very nationalist, very aggressive, And there is a risk that our liberal democracy is fragile, it's going to become even more fragile, and some of these right-wing extremist people are going to come to power. That's a material risk, the return of fascism and of totalitarianism. And now, because of technology, it's easier to spread deep fakes, misinformation, disinformation, and so on a scale that was much more than what Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda of Hitler, could do. Subtle and non-subtle ways in which we're manipulating minds day in, day out. And big tech is part of it. Facebook is totally shameless. Shame on them. Because Mark Zuckerberg, to make money, he doesn't care about anything, but just maximizing on profit. And it's become a platform where all these weird conspiracy theories, I mean, the kind of stuff that QAnon does and says and is spread around the web is just totally mind-boggling. Totally mind-boggling. It's sickening. It's sickening, but to an extent that even Goebbels, the Nazi, couldn't do. They can reach billions of people and spread misinformation and lies and conspiracy about Jews, about gay, about black people, about minorities, about Mexican, about anybody, without any way of trying to stop it. And it's really dangerous. It's really dangerous.
Well, what's fascinating about it is that it's part of the business model. I mean, we're now moving into the attention economy, and the way that they've monetized people's engagement with the platforms. So the platform, like, in fact, there was a big study that showed once Twitter deplatformed Trump, that misinformation decreased significantly. But the business model, again, it's still based on perception. I mean, and that's where art and the art of perception of market forces versus, I mean, your average person stands in front of a painting at a museum for less than 6 seconds. So there always is a processional, you know, if you go to the Metropolitan or the Guggenheim or the Tate, you always see people moving. And what's fascinating about that is that we're now in a kind of an era where the web itself is a sort of procession space where people are kind of moving through the websites. There's a kind of an architecture of information that is still, that's why the biggest companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and so on, they've now been able to monetize attention, you know, in such an incredible fashion. Again, looking at GameStop just last week, I keep going back to that because it was so wild that these kids on Reddit just went crazy and were just hyping the stock. But let's talk about cryptocurrency for a second. I wanted to show you one thing really quickly, actually two. And I'm going to give a shout out to my friend John McCormick, who sent me this fun image. And basically what I want to kind of riff on with you, Nouriel, is how do you think perception affects society right now? Because we're in an era where everyone is a hyper-fragmented perception. And because of that, we're in an era where people can't seem to get a sense of consensus. And like you were saying, democracy is quite fragile. But the eerie sensibility of the way art and science and tech kind of are in this toxic whirlpool right now. Whether it's Twitter or Facebook, your perception and how long you engage a tweet or a post is being radically monetized. And that's where some of the biggest kind of economics are occurring. So let me just show you guys this really quickly. This is from the Cambridge Center for Existential. They study when societies are in collapse. It's a really good chart. Your average civilization lasts for about 300 years. And so the average lifespan of a civilization, it's a really good, it's called the Cambridge Center for Existential Studies. They study like when societies collapse. So Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steel, and so on. But if we go from that, this is from a currency from the island of Yap. It's called a Neolithic currency. And Milton Friedman did his PhD on this. And it was fascinating because on this island, what they would do is they would make these huge stones. They were called rye. And they would basically, like if I had a goat and I wanted to buy your goat, I'd have to make this huge stone and bring 15 people would carry the stone to you. And you know, then I'd walk over with the goat and you'd have this big stone. But one day, one of the stones fell in the ocean. And it's basically a Stone Age currency. And there's a famous phrase saying the Stone Age didn't end for lack of stone. It ended because people came up with better ideas. And what's fascinating about this is like a social ledger. Everyone knew the value of the stone. It's a small island. And it's, you know, so they really did a series of studies of showing if everyone knew the currency and the value of, if I have one goat, is it worth one or two or half or a fraction of one of these stones? So when the stone fell in the ocean, nobody could get it. So they ended up just referring to it as a virtual stone. And that's, a lot of people say that's one of the first beginnings of thinking about kind of a cryptocurrency and a social ledger. But do you have any thoughts on that? And because I mean, your book, Crisis Economics, I mean, I do think right now in 2021, we're at a really strange tipping point, and the economy could go in a lot of different directions. Yeah. And we're still, it's just, there's a deep anxiety and uncertainty. And meanwhile, you can print fiat currency. And again, like that, the Germans during Weimar Republic, they just kept printing more and more and more money. Same thing in like Zimbabwe now. With you can get $1 trillion note in Zimbabwe, but you can't even buy a loaf of bread with it.
Well, you know, my view is that, you know, I'm public enemy #1 of cryptocurrency. Honestly, I think they're total bullshit. Because on one side, I can criticize the current monetary arrangement. It's true, we're monetizing large fiscal deficits. And if you keep on doing it, we're going to eventually cause inflation, if not stagflation. So that's a risk of debasement of fiat currency. But we need also the stimulus, because without it, the Great Recession of last year would have become another depression. And we learned the lessons of the Great Depression by not avoiding fiscal stimulus and not avoiding printing money. We needed to do that, because otherwise this year will be in a depression rather than a meek economic recovery. So those were things were necessary. So those who think that the basement of fiat currency is all evil don't understand the alternative of not printing money and learning large budget deficit when necessary. On the other side, I think there is a risk of inflation, but I think that other assets like treasury, inflation index, real estate, equities, even gold can be a better hedge against inflation than cryptocurrencies for many reasons. And I think that calling them currencies is a total misnomer, because anybody who knows anything about money knows that the money has to have at least 4 functions. One has to be a unity of account, things that be priced in that currency. 2 has to be a scalable means of payment. 3 has to be a stable store of value over goods and wealth. 4 has to be a single numeraire, so you can do a relative price of different goods and services. Now, by any standard, all cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, fail all 4 criteria for being a currency. They are not a unit of account. Nothing is priced in Bitcoin. It's not a scalable means of payment. With Bitcoin, you can do only 5 transactions per second. With the Visa network, you can do 25,000 transactions per second. And there are digital payment systems like Venmo, PayPal, Square, Alipay, WeChat Pay, M-Pesa in Africa, and so on, that can do millions or billions of transactions over a day. So it's not scalable. It's not a stable store of value over goods and services, because the price of Bitcoin in a matter of hours can go up 20% or fall 20%. That's why not even the crypto conferences accept Bitcoin for payment if you want to go to the conference, because the entire profit margin can be wiped out in 2 hours by a 20% fall in price. And finally, it's not a single numeraire, because this idea of tokenization is totally idiotic. If I need a token to buy Coca-Cola, a Pepsi Cola token, and I need another token to buy a Coca-Cola, I cannot even compare the relative price of Pepsi Cola with Coca-Cola. Think about ancient payment system. Even the Flintstone had a more developed financial system than in crypto, because they had the shells, and they were using shells rather than stones as a payment for money. So they were not going to barter. Once you have tokenization, it's like going to barter, because you have a different token for every good and service. So it's literally going back to barter. So it's a Stone Age kind of technology, or pre-Stone Age technology, crypto. And the only way you can keep your money safe is putting into cold storage. This is again a Stone Age technology. Otherwise, they can hack your private accounts, your exchanges, can steal all your money. Once it's gone for good. So crypto is just nonsense. There's so much bullshit talked about it. The future of money, it's complicated. The future of money and finance is fintech. It's revolutionizing payment system, credit allocation, insurance, asset management. But fintech has nothing to do with crypto, has nothing to do with blockchain. It's centralized, it's based on AI, on big data, on machine learning, on canvassing information, and using this technology as centralized to provide more efficient financial services. So the future is centralized, not decentralized, is private, permission, trusty system, not a trustless, permissionless public ledger or DLT. That's nonsense. Blockchain is the most overhyped and least useful technology in the history of humanity, and is an energy hog. If you have to, for any transaction validated by 100,000 miners, you're using energy is going to destroy the planet. It doesn't make any sense, proof of work. So it's a failure. It's just nonsense. I'm very critical of the banks. I'm very critical of the hedge funds. I'm very critical of the current financial system. I know there is a lot of fraud. There is a lot of manipulation. But guess, there's much more fraud and manipulation in crypto land than in any legacy financial system. So you can be against the current financial system. You can criticize it, but you don't have to be in favor of something that's just nonsense like blockchain or pseudo cryptocurrencies. They're not currencies. They're not even assets. They're just totally vaporware. They're fake.
Well, I mean, if you look at the history of market force bubbles, I mean, it's really wild because there's the Tulip Mania. Do you remember this one?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. Where if you went back to history of the Dutch, you could have someone's entire salary in a tulip, and people were starting to trade these tulips like crazy.
It was a bubble.
Yeah. And
like
so
many bubbles exist right now, including crypto. Crypto is a bubble. You know, right. Tulips at least had some value. People even today buy tulip from the Netherlands because you like flowers, right? So if you think about an asset, think about an asset. Assets can be things like equities or real estate or bonds. What do they give you? They give you some income, profits, dividends, or a coupon, or a real estate rent. And in addition to that, they've also a capital gain. And they have some other use, like real estate, you can rent your own home for yourself. Even gold that doesn't have any income has capital gain, has some uses, used to have monetary uses, is used now in industry, and there's also some utility because we like jewelry and we've been using jewelry forever. If you think of crypto, doesn't have any income, zero income. It doesn't have any use. It's not used as a payment system. It doesn't have any utility like gold. So the only thing it has is a capital gain based on what? On intrinsic value of zero. So it's a purely speculative tool. I mean, tulips had some value as flowers. We love beautiful flowers. But, you know, in the case of crypto, it doesn't have any use, not any utility, doesn't have any income. So the capital gain is based on just a fake bubble, an irrational bubble. If people buy stuff, the price is going to go up because everybody's going to buy it, even if it doesn't have any fundamental value. It's like GameStop. GameStop is a total failing business. Nobody's buying video games anymore in the store. You can buy them online, and you can buy the PlayStations online as well. So it's a stock should be worth for zero. It's like Blockbuster. Blockbuster went bust. GameStop is the Blockbuster of video games. It's going to go bust. So the value is zero, not even 17. And now because a bunch of kids who hate the hedge funds decided we're going to screw the hedge funds because the hedge funds are shorting the stock, they're pushing the price to 300, 400, 500. They're going to burn themselves because this stock is worth zero. So let's not pretend that these kids are a bunch of revolutionary proletarian Marxists. They're people who unfortunately are skillless, hopeless, incomeless, wealthless. They're unemployed, and they're staying at home. And what they're doing, they're going on Robinhood, and they're being totally screwed by Robinhood because they're borrowing leverage of 3, 5, 10 times, going and day trading. And most of them are going to lose money, and they're going to lose their own shirt, like those who are going into crypto. So this is not a revolution of the masses against the evil hedge funds. And by the way, many people on Reddit are traders themselves. There are some hedge funds who are going long. They are manipulating that market. So I have no sympathy for the hedge funds. Screw them if they're losing billions. But the idea that these are people of proletarians or Marxists who want to do a revolution and want to change society is nonsense. There are people who, again, want to get rich quickly. And if you learn one thing, if you read the book by Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, about the genius, you know, to become #1 in your field, you need 10,000 hours of hard work. Whether you're a banker or an economist or an artist or a poet or anything in the world. The idea, even a trader, has to work hard year after year, decade after decade to become good. The idea they can overnight, everybody can trade options and become a genius and make money is just nonsense. And we've created a whole vaporware group of people with the think that since they don't have any income or skills or assets, they can become millionaires overnight by doing nothing but trading option. They're going to end up all in pain and in misery. That's the reality of it. Of course, many millennials were screwed during the global financial crisis because they graduated then and they didn't have good jobs and income. And then they were screwed again during the COVID crisis and they're upset. And I understand they're being upset. But first of all, many of these people on Reddit are not these millennials. They're people who actually have funds, who have money, who are investing and so on. They're not just a bunch of kids. And the idea that you can just make out of money out of nowhere, out of pushing the price of something is worth 0 to 500, there'll be lots of tears at the end of the day, lots of tears and lots of blood. So it's a game that will end up in tears and blood.
Well, that you just made my
It's
day.
a bubble. It's a total bubble. Of course, there's a
Yeah.
bubble in the stock market. There is a bubble in crypto. There is a bubble in SPACs. There's a bubble in every financial market. And there is a bubble also in these internet related kind of stocks. It's a big bubble.
So
we live in a bubble, and we're
right.
delusional because we believe the bubble is not going to burst. But as we learn, eventually bubble bursts, and then millions of people lose their jobs, their income, their livelihood, their wealth. That's going to end up in disaster.
Right. And in India, they would say, you know, what holds the world? And they'd say, oh, the world rests on a turtle. Then you ask them, what does a turtle rest on? And you say, oh, it rests on another turtle. You know, turtles all the way down. But by the way, your nickname is Dr. Doom, right? And so just to the audience, he was, Nouriel became this, as you just heard, he's a very eloquent speaker on both the intersection of economics and everyday life. But because many people here are involved in the arts, if you go to Christie's or Sotheby's, you can see the same thing happening where people are auctioning a painting and everyone's just shouting and the painting goes up and up and up.
Yeah.
So,
but there's a bubble in the art world as well. Absolutely.
Right. And in fact, a lot of people are beginning to kind of rethink the way art is sold. So there's masterworks.io, for example, which is an interesting, they have a relationship with Brooklyn Rail. So to me, at least, what you were just saying was fascinating from the viewpoint of the reality as we know it. We're in the era of the quantified self, where so much data about you is being marketed and sold. Do you have any thoughts on that as well? Because your average, from what I've read, your average Facebook account generates thousands of dollars of income for Mark Zuckerberg per for a very specific period of time. Do you have any thoughts on that? And like Twitter supposedly lost like about $4 billion in value after they deplatformed Trump. So things like that. I mean, these bubbles that's what just seems to be holding everything together right now.
Well, the value of many of these big tech firms is based on the data that they sell and they monetize to advertising them or selling them to other people for marketing and so on. And the point is that this big tech company, whether it's Google or Amazon or Facebook or Netflix or whichever not, they don't pay for the data that we create as users. So they claim that they're giving us free services because their apps are free, but we're generating actually all the data that actually we're losing privacy. And not only we're losing privacy, but I would say that the $1 trillion valuation of many of these firms is on the ownership of the data that we create. And I think that's part of the increase in income and wealth inequality. So I think that the better system, rather than breaking them up and things of that sort, will be a model in which if you're Google or if you're Amazon or if you're Facebook and you want to use my data, you have to pay for it. And there'll be a market value. I don't know whether it's $1,000 per year or $2,000 per year or more or less, but there is some value. And if they had to pay for the data and use it, then their valuation will be down probably 30, 40, 50% or more. Because right now we generate the data and they use it and they misuse it and they sell it and they abuse it and they don't pay for it. So one way of trying to reduce the power of big tech and reduce income and wealth inequality is to say that, electricity was really the main asset in the 19th century. Oil was in the 20th century. Then it became a digital world. And now it's not just the digital world, but the data we create, the bits are things that we should be possessing, we should be owning, both for privacy issue and for ownership of that asset we create. And if we do that, maybe we'll have a reduction of the power of big tech, we'll have a reduction of their market value, and we'll have an increase of income and wealth for individuals rather than increase in income and wealth inequality. So one of the solutions is crack down on big tech and have ownership of the data. We also are creative types. Think about the great creativities created by even people on Instagram or TikTok or the other stuff we do that we post online. And we don't even own it anymore because they own it. So we own it like an artist. Artists are supposed to receive royalties for what they create. The same thing should be happening for each one of us. Each of us on the internet and on social media, we're an artist, we're a creator, and therefore we should have copyright and rights on the data and the information and the creativity we're creating, rather than giving it away for free. That's what should be going on.
Right. No, this has been great. So I remember you have to go around too. So I want to make sure to be respectful of everybody's time.
Let me check. I think around 2:15 or so, but it depends.
So Nick, do you want to jump in for a second? How are we doing for time? And I just want to, because I want to make sure that there's some great
Actually,
questions.
we can finish at 2:30. It's okay.
Okay,
I was
great.
able to push my next appointment. So, but
Thank you.
2:30 sharp, I have to be off.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a great conversation because this I love hearing you riff on these issues because right now everyone is filled with anxiety about the economic future, and the economy is very deeply uncertain. So with the Biden administration and bringing in Janet Yellen, because you had worked with her during the Clinton administration, which actually had a lot of pretty solid fundamentals done well. It seems like every single time a Democrat comes in has to clean up from the Republicans because the Republicans messed up everything. But the eerie thing about the way contemporary society is going is that this kind of quantification of the self, the datafication of everything that can be digital will be digital. And I'm just intrigued, you're working on your book right now. I'm working on my book. It's called Digital Fictions, The Future of Storytelling. And I'm fascinated with how artificial intelligence and algorithms are changing the way we think of a story. And one could argue finance itself is a narrative, like how we think about these issues. So Nick, just to respectfully open up time, it's almost 1:50. I see people asking questions and so on. Do you want to moderate that, or how do you guys want to do it?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Okay.
Well, firstly, I want to thank you both, and I want to thank everyone that has joined us today for this really amazing and lively conversation going on in the chat and all of these wonderful questions. Apologies, I don't think we'll be able to get to all, but we'll do our best. I would like to, actually, I just messaged Thomas, and Thomas, he unfortunately doesn't have a mic, but I would like to ask his question on his behalf. His question is,
yes.
I hope, okay.
Yeah, I'm back. I went to get
Perfect.
a bottle of water. I'm thirsty.
No worries. Thomas asks, or states and asks, one of the most difficult developments of the last 4 decades has been this quote unquote stealth rise of neoliberalism. Many cultural and economic theorists contend that this ideology is at the heart of many current predicaments, such as wealth inequality, hyper-individualism, privatization, the dysfunctional consequences of laissez-faire free markets, stultification of creativity, etc. What are your views on the successes and or failures of neoliberalism?
Well, if you're a Marxist, you believe that economic structures are more important than cultural and ideological superstructures, and those ideological superstructures are manifestation of the current economic system. So I don't think there's neoliberalism that has caused the rise in inequality. I think there are fundamental reasons why there is a rise in income and wealth inequality, having to do with globalization, with migration, with trade, with technological innovation that is skill bias, labor saving, and is capital intensive. And therefore, workers, whether white collars or blue collar, low value added and medium value added, are being displaced, their jobs and income, by technology, and globalization has done in part the same. So because of that, and because of the benefits that are coming to capital from the globalization and the technological advancement, we created this neoliberal ideology that became the ideology of this globalized world. But the causality goes from changes in economics and technology to ideology, as opposed to ideology affecting the real economy. So I think that the right way to think about it is not liberalism, neoliberalism that has caused this damage, but it's just a reflection of underlying economic powerful forces where capital is more powerful, labor is weak. And we're seeing this massive increase in income and wealth inequality that is becoming actually worse over time, and we need to do something about it. So we have to start with the economic policies, not by the ideology. And the good news, I would say, is the following one. Even Biden, that was in the Obama administration, under Clinton, when I served, and even under Obama, the Democratic Party, that was supposed to be the party of the worker, unfortunately became the party of the elites and the party of some minorities. But they lost completely the working class, the blue collars and the white collars. They were socially and economically conservative. And since the Democratic Party had no message for them, even Hillary Clinton called them deplorables. Then they went to an hypocrite like Trump that pretended to be a populist, but is a plutocrat. So he ran as a populist, caring about white blue collars, but he governed as a plutocrat. So he's not a populist, but is a pluto-populist, a plutocrat that is in a sheep's cloth of a populist. But the problem was Democratic Party lost the working class. But the same now Democratic Party of Biden, I think, has gotten religion. It's not in religion because Biden comes himself from a working class background. He's the only president in the last 40 years doesn't have an Ivy League degree. He realizes that the rise in income and wealth inequality is becoming a huge social problem. He realizes that if the Democrats don't have an economic message for the white blue collars, they're going to lose them for good to these populists on the right. And therefore, whether it's Janet Yellen, and I work for her, she's really a progressive who cares about income and wealth inequality. The head of the new Council of Economic Advisor, Sissy Rouse, who's an African-American professor of economics at Princeton, was one of my classmates at Harvard, and she's been working on labor economics and inequality for decades. Even Lael Brainard, who is one of the key members of the Fed, and most likely she's going to replace Powell as the Fed chairman next year, because she's only Democrat on the Fed board. She's somebody who's very sensitive about inequality issues. So I think what's going to be happening with the Biden administration is that we realize we're really on the verge of a massive backlash that's going to have social and political consequences unless we deal with income and wealth inequality. And there are lots of policies that, broadly speaking, are about empowering workers, unions, and jobs rather than capital, entrepreneurs, and wealth and corporation. And that's the direction we need to go. And by the way, having this pro-labor policy is not just good for workers, it's also good for the stock market. Because, you know, one of the main ideas of Marx was that if you have a redistribution of income from labor to capital, you're redistributing income from those who are spending to those who are saving. So capital is going to destroy itself because of underconsumption, where there's too much profits, there's not enough labor income. And some of the weakness of the economy of underconsumption is that workers are highly indebted and their labor income has not been growing. And because of that, we have underconsumption. And redistributing income from capital and profits to labor and workers and wages actually is going to increase growth, because it increase consumption, and it's going to increase the stock market, because the stock market needs consumption and demand. And in a world in which there is not labor income, there is not enough demand. So what's good for workers is also good for the stock market. And what's bad for workers eventually is even bad for the stock market. So the gap between Wall Street and Main Street has to be resolved by giving more to Main Street to be able to have more sustainable growth of Wall Street as well. If all the money goes to Wall Street and we destroy Main Street, eventually Wall Street is going to self-destroy itself and capitalism is going to self-destroy itself, as Karl Marx presciently understood.
Wow, thank you. I think you kind of touched on Leah Diaz. You had asked something kind of related to that. I think, Nouriel, you kind of covered that. I would like to pass the mic now over to Joshua Kane to ask your question. Joshua, you should.
Hi.
Oh, there you are.
Oh my God. Dr. Roubini, I mean, you're like one of my heroes. It's so wonderful to hear somebody speak so rationally in today's day and age, especially with how crazy this bubble seems to be, this everything bubble. Assuming it's going to pop, which is, you have to, what do you think that will do to the political climate in the world in terms of nationalism and the rise of potentially fascism, and the Chinese model potentially spreading further?
Well, what's happening is that for the last 20 years, workers have been left behind. And because of that, what have we done? Before the global financial crisis, we allowed people essentially to borrow money because they couldn't keep up with the Joneses. They didn't have enough income. So we told people, you borrow money, and then you go and borrow money to buy a home, to buy a credit card, to have a car, to have a student loan, and you name it. And then this debt crisis eventually occurred when the bubble went burst and when home prices collapsed. And people lost their jobs, they lost their income, they lost their homes, they lost their financial wealth. But what we did was, in the last 10 years after the global financial crisis, we did not resolve the fundamental problems that the wages of the workers are actually going down. And after the global financial crisis, people were first fired, and when they were rehired, they were rehired not with full-time jobs, with good benefits, and with full-time employment. They were rehired as gig workers, part-time workers, contractors, all sorts of other freelancers, hourly workers. So the jobs that become more precarious and more fragile That happened after the global financial crisis, happening again right now, unless we have the economic policy to support workers, labor income, union, and so on. Because otherwise the market force is going to lead to even weakening, greater weakening of labor income. It's going to be a disaster for the economy. So when the bubble bursts, you lose your income, you lose your jobs, you lose your wealth, you cannot pay your debts, and there is even more economic damage. So creating essentially a fake reality through an asset and a credit bubble like we did after the global financial crisis, and repeating it again right now, and eventually it's going to go bust, is going to create even more economic damage. We have to create an economy is real, not a bubble economy. That means investing into people, into human capital, into skills, into providing workers and students with the skills so they can survive and thrive in a world that's going to be increasingly, whether we like it or not, digital, run by AI, automation, robotics, and globalization. So we need to endow everybody with the skills so they can survive and thrive. We cannot stop technology. We cannot stop the dynamics of the market. We cannot stop even globalization. We have to make sure that globalization and technology works for all people rather than for an elite of 1%. The stock market, by the way, is not a reflection of the real economy. There is a gap between Wall Street and Main Street because 81% of all the equity market wealth is held by the 10% of richest people. 51% of the equity wealth is held by the top 1%. And the bottom 50% of the population in America, 165 million people, owns only 0.5% of the stock market. So the stock market goes higher and higher, went up another 20% last year, but half of the population doesn't have any equity wealth and therefore remains left behind. That's why this is a K-shaped recovery. Those who have jobs and income are stable and wealth are doing better, and those who are partially employed or unemployed and don't have skills and don't have financial wealth are becoming worse off. So the gap between rich and the poor is becoming bigger as the wealthy become wealthier and the poor are becoming poorer. And eventually we know inequality leads to social unrest and revolutions unless we do something about it. And the only good news is the Biden administration realizes that, and the economic policy of the Biden administration are going to be pro-workers, pro-families, pro-jobs, pro-unions, and pro-income of those who are working class, as opposed to capital and corporates. So I'm hopeful that things are going to change, however, gradually over time.
Amazing. Thank you, Nouriel. I'm going to hand the mic now over to Carolyn. You should be able to activate your mic now.
Hi, this is Carolyn. And
Carolyn.
yeah, I had a bunch of questions and I'm not sure which one caught your eye. Basically, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your contribution generally to everybody understanding what's going on through the years. Okay, I would mostly like to hear more information about the latest devices for financial rigging. I was a lawyer for 20 years before I was an artist, so I have a basic understanding of credit derivatives. And I know that's as bigger problem than ever as far as I can understand it. But I'm kind of interested in what other devices might be out there that we should keep an eye on, that reform should be aimed at. And then also, yeah, exactly what kinds of reforms might actually help. I mean, we've heard some about how the real economy could be restored, but I think also how, like right now, the Fed's been trying to levitate the markets out of a bunch of problems. And how does it ever even get back on a better track where companies with real productivity are supported and the others are allowed to fail without bankrupting all the pension funds and so on? So take what you like out of that. Thanks.
Well, you know, I think that for the last few decades, as I pointed out, there has been a bit of a financialization of the real economy. We created, you know, a situation where people who did not have income tried to keep up with the Joneses by borrowing too much personal debt, credit card debt, mortgage debt, student loans, auto loans, and then it went bust. It went bust 10 years ago, went bust again this time around. and more financial and economic stability is based on the idea people should have jobs that give you good jobs, good income, good benefits, and have enough money to spend and to save. So you save for the long run and you build savings that are invested into real firms rather than financial engineering and leverage. So that's the fundamental problem we have. And of course, the manifestation of a financial bubble are different. 10 years ago was subprime and CDOs and CLOs and you name it. This time around might be SPACs and other forms of shadow banking and all these bubbles in a variety of technology stocks. And now the bubble that is occurring with zero policy rates and people gambling on Bed and Bath or GameStop or things that are actually worthless. Of course, with zero policy rates, there is a huge amount of slosh of liquidity searching for assets, and the value of assets is levitating well above the economic fundamentals. They're not really good. And as I pointed out, there is a gap between Wall Street and Main Street. And what's good for Wall Street is not good for Main Street. For every job created by Amazon, there are 10 jobs lost in retail, for example. So the stock market goes higher because firms are achieving their earning targets by slashing jobs, but your labor cost is my labor income and my consumption. And therefore, what's good for Wall Street is bad for Main Street. And we have the increasing gap between asset prices going one direction and the real economy going in the other direction. And as I pointed out, 81% of equity wealth is held by top 10% of people. And the bottom has almost no equity wealth and almost no financial wealth. So we have to stop this system where people are trying to survive by having bubbles in the value of their homes, in the value of their stocks, through leverage, through speculation. And speculation used to be the realm of hedge funds, but now every kid who has an account with Robinhood believes that he or she can become rich while it's being shafted by globalization and technology by speculating and having leverage. And it's delusional because you cannot create money out of nowhere, out of vaporware, out of bubbles. All these people are going to lose their shirt, their wealth and income over time. So we have to create an economy where people have real jobs in productivity, in the economies and industries of the future. There is a huge amount of technological innovation, is robotic, automation, AI, electric vehicles, global climate change, dealing with pandemic, healthcare, biotech. There are dozens of new firms and industries of the future. And if we provide people with the skills and the technology to be able to work, whether it's services or manufacturing or industry, there will be millions of jobs created. If we invest into environment, if we invest into infrastructure, if we invest into solar, into wind, into the technology of the future. So we can create jobs and income that are stable, but we have to engage workers, we have to engage and empower unions, and we have to have policies that are pro-workers rather than pro-capital. That's the economic agenda. Otherwise, letting people gamble who don't have jobs, don't have skills, and create bubbles that are going to go bust is not a resolution. So it's not a fight between the poor and the rich, between the hedge funds and the millennials. You cannot create wealth through bubbles. And what's going on with GameStop is creating another bubble. It's going to end up in blood and tears. The reality is we have to create good jobs with good workers, with good benefits, with stability, and with long-run ability of people to survive and thrive in this digital globalized economy. That's the challenge of the future. Not vaporware, not crypto, not bubbles, not SPACs, not leverage, not Reddit, not bubbles in the stock market. All that stuff is going to go bust.
Thank you, Nouriel. Yeah, Paul, I just wanted to make sure your mic was working.
Yep, I'm good. It's really great to hear this, especially in the conversation about the arts, the creative economy, and the attention economy. So please continue. I mean, Nouriel, this has been great. My mind is racing in a million directions here. I keep thinking of this very famous Karl Marx quote. I mean, of course, Marx and Engels had the famous phrase, all that is solid melts into air. But, there's a famous quote from Karl Marx where he says, the production of too many useful things results in too many useless people. So here we are with Republicans running around and trying to destroy everything. It's really, it's very hard, life affirming to hear your perspective. Did anybody else want to riff or jump in?
Well, if I could add something, in a world where there's going to be AI, robotic, and automation, of course, many jobs are going to disappear because they're going to be replaced by technology, and not just blue-collar jobs, but also white-collar jobs, and not just the low-value-added jobs, but also high-value-added or medium-value-added jobs. So the one thing that for the time being computers cannot do is to do stuff that's truly creative, even if some people believe that in the future AI is going to be able to create great art and great music and whatever not, but we're not yet there. So I think that the rescue is going to be that the people are going to be surviving are going to be people that, one, are doing stuff that's creative classes, artists, visual artists, performing artists, and many of them are going to collaborate with technology. Because as I said, technology needs content, and content requires creative people. So the jobs of the future are going to be more the creative ones that technology and robotic automation cannot disrupt, cannot displace very easily. Maybe eventually in the long run, the AI can also replace the artists, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And if anything, artists are now using technology to do more creative stuff. I mean, there's lots of, say, DJs that are doing EDM that are using actually AI and technology to create great music. And some of the new artists are using technology to do mixed media, again, using technology to leverage their own skills. So I think that you could embed together art and technology in a way that empowers the creative classes, empowers those who have high skills, empowers those who are creative, empowers the artists wherever they are. And that's going to be a contribution to society. Each and one of us, actually, even when we do a TikTok video, we are art creators, we are directors, we are film producers, we are actors, we are editors. So that's what we're doing. We're creating actually forms of art. And that might be the future of humanity, creating more of these digital forms of productive stuff. But we have to own it ourselves rather than having the TikToks or the Amazons or the Facebooks of the world owning it for us. That's the challenge we're facing. We create it, we own it, we should be paid for it.
Yeah, and by the way, so Nick, don't forget. I mean, I see plenty of people asking questions. So if anybody,
I want to thank everyone for making my job so hard today, because there are a lot of really good questions in here, and it's very difficult to pick. I'm going to pass the mic over to Maya. Maya, you should get a prompt to turn on your mic now.
Can you hear me now? I'm
Yes.
calling from Iraq, so the internet is very shaky here. Thank
you're
you so much.
You're in Iraq?
I'm in Baghdad. Yep.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm based here as a reporter, and I don't usually follow econ and finance, but since moving here a couple of years ago, it's been one of the things that I've been following. So I really appreciate the technical detail of the discussion. But I'm also Lebanese, so I actually wanted to ask about Lebanon, and a country that basically has been often seen as kind of at the forefront of creation in the Middle East, and has had to deal with basically one of the worst economic crises, I think, worldwide, when you think about the scale of that country. So Nouriel, I wanted to ask, kind of, what do you see as the potential solution to a situation where the political class is very much entrenched in Lebanon's fiscal crisis, and what role art might be able to play in a potential solution? Thank you.
Yeah, you know, it's a fascinating country, and I have many Lebanese friends. And one of the paradoxes of Lebanon is that Lebanese people, live like Jewish people, are minorities that are very successful, whether in business or in the creative world or into lots of professions all over the world. There is a diaspora of Lebanese people from Asia to Africa to Europe to Middle East, and you name it. And it's really an amazing culture. But in some sense, some of the better people in Lebanon, because there was not economic opportunity, have left, have gone abroad, and they're actually thriving and very successful in whatever profession they do abroad. While at home, we have been left with a corrupt kind of group of people. You have all these fragmented ethnic groups that have been fighting each other during civil war. There's an influence, of course, of forces like in Syria and Iran on Hezbollah and the Shiite. And there are divisions between Sunni and Shia and Maronites and Druze, and you name it. And in the past, that led to civil war. Now we haven't had the civil war for a while, but we had a corrupt system of politicians that have not led to economic stability. And the country is bankrupt. It's just defaulted on its foreign debt, it's defaulted on its public debt. And since the debt is held by the banks, also the banks are essentially bankrupt. So the government is bankrupt, the banks are bankrupt, the central bank is bankrupt, the country is bankrupt, and the people are also mostly bankrupt. And this terrible explosion that occurred in that warehouse in Beirut just last year destroyed also part of the country and of the main city of the country. So the solution is you have to get rid of those bums whether they are Shiite or Sunni, doesn't matter. They're corrupt. You need the true people's revolution and empower people to care about the people, because it's an amazing country that has amazing people, amazing resources, with a diaspora that is wealthy, that will be willing to go home and work to rebuild the country, but it's not going to go home if you have a corrupt political and economic system. So you have to do tabula rasa, get rid of those who are corrupt, those who have destroyed the country for the last few decades, and restore an economic system and a political system where people, doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Muslim or Sunni or Shiite or Jew or Druze or you name it, you survive together, not by being divided. And unfortunately, this great country with amazing natural resources, with amazing people, has been literally screwed by its own politicians and those who have been in power. This has to end. And too many actually foreign forces have used Lebanon to do their own proxy wars, whether it was Iraq, whether it was Syria, whether it's Iran, whether it was Israel, whether it was the Turks, whether it was, the Saudis. Everybody's using essentially Lebanon as a proxy war for other geopolitical problems. The same thing led to the destruction of Syria, and something similar has happened in the past and the present in the case of Lebanon. It's really terrible because it's a wonderful country with amazing people, but has been destroyed from within and from the outside as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible insight. I mean, the Middle East, the proxy wars between Turkey, Syria, I mean, it just boggles the mind. And thank you for the question from Baghdad. I mean,
the proxy wars are occurring. Essentially, you have more than now the Israeli-Palestinian problem is a proxy war between Iran on one side and Saudi Arabia, that is Sunni, and his allies like the Emirates and other ones. So you have Shia against Sunni, and those proxy wars between Sunni and Shia have led to the destruction. Think of it of what? Destruction of Yemen, destruction of Libya, destruction of Syria, destruction of Lebanon, destruction of Iraq, and then may lead to the destruction of other countries in the region, because wherever you have Sunni and Shia, you have a proxy war between Iran and Saudi. The same way there were proxy wars between the US and Soviet Union during the Cold War. And the damage is a disaster. There's a humanitarian disaster in Yemen. Millions of people are on the verge of starvation, and the fault is not just of Iran, it's also of the Saudis. Both are at fault. And millions of people are at the risk of starving in Yemen because of what's happening. Same thing in Libya, same thing in Iraq, same thing in Syria. This has to stop.
Nouriel, what's beautiful about what you were just saying is a couple weeks ago, I interviewed a very renowned artist, Ai Weiwei, and he did a documentary about the refugee crisis. So what's fascinating is that many of the refugees fleeing Syria then end up in Germany. They end up on the coast of all the different countries in the southern part of the European Union. And then that actually creates a rising nationalism, and because those people then feel like their country is getting more refugees, and that leads to kind of a crazy feedback. It leads to very strange feedback between the right wing and their fear of immigrants and fear of refugees.
Throughout Europe now there is a backlash against refugees because, a larger number of people coming from abroad, the refugees, some economic, some political one. And now the right-wing populism is because there is the fear of all these Muslim people coming to Germany, coming to Italy, coming to Greece, coming to France, coming all over Europe. Even in Sweden, this progressive, now right-wing populist parties are becoming more popular because of the fear of the Muslim and the minority coming and stealing our jobs, our income, our women, our society, our culture, and so on and so on. We have to give an opportunity for these people to be successful at home. Otherwise, if this country collapses and there is civil war and failed states, first there is economic disaster at home, and most of these refugees are going to end up into refugee camps. And even if they end up in Europe, there'll be a backlash against them. So the solution is not just migration. I'm in favor of migration. I'm in favor of accepting refugees because we have to be human about it, but we have to provide opportunity by rebuilding their own societies. And there is a time bomb right now in sub-Saharan Africa. Because of global climate change, you have what? You have collapse of economies, you have desertification, collapse of agriculture, that leads to ethnic war, there's civil war because then different ethnic groups are fighting for food and so on, and that leads to collapse of economy, and that leads to migration. People forget that the Syrian civil war was preceded by 4 years of a drought, and that drought led to collapse of agriculture, and at that time, of course, Alawites and Sunni and others did not like each other, but they were living happily together before. Once you had an economic collapse, they started killing each other. So the basis of the Syrian civil war was not a religious fight, it was an economic fight. So at the end of the day, economic forces are those who lead to collapse of societies, civil war, migration, revolution, and violence. At the end of the day, you have to provide people with food, shelter, economic opportunity. Otherwise, they starve and they start to kill each other. That's what's happening all over the world. And there is a time bomb in sub-Saharan Africa, because you have 1 billion of Africans that in 50 years from now will be 2 billion, and in societies that are still very fragile. Many of the African countries are still on the verge of civil war. Of course, there are success stories. It is not all a disaster, but in some parts of Sub-Saharan Africa, the risk of civil war, of failed society, of economic collapse is still with us. And if we don't deal with global climate change and economic opportunity, this disaster is going to become much worse.
Yeah, I mean, the roots of so much conflict right now actually could go directly to climate change. And
it does.
Yeah. So that, Nick, do you want to, there was other questions, and I want to just make sure to keep, and Nouriel, thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it's now 2:17. I remember you, so 2:30 is your cutoff. So just get people in here.
I echo the thanks, and I want to thank everyone for asking so many brilliant questions. Unfortunately, we can't get to them all today, but I'm going to hand the mic over to the Rails publisher and artistic director, Phong Bui. Phong, you should be able to turn on your mic.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Paul. Nouriel, it's amazing. I'm so happy that you able to join us, and you are not what could be considered insular and hermetic intellectual. You speak with such rhapsodic pace that make me excited, because I remember meeting you through the late Gandalf Gavan. We party your
I remember. It was a great friend and artist, and he did 2 pieces for my home. He tragically died at a young age.
2009, 2010. I think I've been in your loft at least twice.
It'll be a pleasure to invite you again. I always do art nights and musical nights. So, and I love the artists and the creative people. So let's stay in touch.
I have 2 questions for you. I want to be very punctual and fast. I know that you have a close relationship with Jeffrey Sachs, the former director of the Institute at Columbia, who I met once, and then somehow got involved in sustainable development solution networks. And I know that there was a debate, there was a disagreement with William Easterly, 2006 book, White Man's Burden, which I couldn't get through, it's so boring. But how would you describe that pair, that discourse, the same way that I remember, from Keynesian economic and Milton Friedman, microeconomics? To me, there's a certain kind of conservative and progressive tendency on the two of them. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah, Jeff Sachs was my advisor while I was doing my PhD at Harvard. And since then, it's moved to Columbia, head of the Earth Institute, and he was an advisor to Kofi Annan when he was the UN Secretary General, and to others. He's really a great wise man and cares about poverty, about economic development, about global climate change. So I'm very supportive of his views. Bill Easterly, who is a colleague of mine at NYU in the economics department at Arts and Science, has done a critique of aid. And I think that critique is valid in some dimension and is incorrect in other dimension. The dimension is not correct is that we need to give aid to African countries because there are people who are starving. There are people who don't have economic opportunity. We need to invest into healthcare, in education, in skills, in giving economic opportunity to this country. And we cannot lend them money as debt because eventually that debt burden is not sustainable. So it has to be grant. So we need that aid, and therefore Jeff Sachs is right. And some of the critique of Bill Easterly is wrong. What Bill Easterly maybe gets right is the following thing. As people say many times in development, don't give me a fish, teach me how to fish, right? If you give just food to people who are starving in Africa, you don't give them the skills, the education, the human capital, the training to be able to be productive members of society. Yeah, they're not going to starve, but you're not going to get them out of a trap of poverty. So the aid should not be just grants to provide food or emergencies. Those are necessities, of course, when people are starving, but you have to invest into stuff like education, like healthcare, social system, and things that provide then the skills and the tools for people to be able to fish, to work, to produce, to start businesses and so on. So I think that I'm more on the Jeff Sachs side of things, with the caveat that what Bill Easterly says about teach me how to fish, don't give me a fish, is also correct. So that critique of aid is correct, but his overall critique of aid to poor countries is incorrect.
Right. Okay. So following what Paul was mentioned earlier about the WPA, the Work Progress Administration, we tend to forget that the progressive era began in 1890s, you know, Nouriel, and then it ended in 1920s, leading to the crash. So the interesting thing about the market crash in 29, in spite of the fact that Hoover was the president and Andrew Milan, we tend to forget that he's actually was a treasurer. You know, the crash happened. The crash happened. That's why Keynesian idea around when he published his famous book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, 36, became like the Bible for economic in a way. And then if you compare to Keynes and somebody more, Milton Friedman, I would argue that Keynes was a member of the Bloomsbury group, you know, Paul? So it makes sense that he was with Liam Foster, you know, of course, Lyndon Strachey, and of course, Virginia Woolf and her husband, and their friends. So you can imagine the worldview is so different. So it makes sense to me that WPA with Eleanor Roosevelt advocated for the federal art was definitely in line to John Dewey philosophy of bringing all the aspects of the providing job and the artist employment to be the cultural worker in the forefront.
Well, you know, in the Great Depression, whether it was Roosevelt or whether it was Keynes, that by being associated with artists realized how to think outside of the box and outside of the orthodoxy, then we realized at that time there were people who were losing their jobs, their income, their skills, and we helped them. Workers, artists, creative people, jobs, unions, and you name it. And the Great Depression, we got out of it through the great stimulus that occurred under FDR. This time around is the same thing. We have a crumbling economy, crumbling infrastructure, crumbling situation with global climate change destroying the planet and making places too hot to be habitable or ending up underwater. And we have the creative people that have been now shafted because of this crisis, because all the jobs of the creative people and hospitality and music and entertainment in New York are shut down and people had to leave New York. And that's a disaster because creativity is going to be the future of humanity. So we need to invest into people, whether it's essential worker, working class, union workers, blue collars, white collars, creative people, artists, non-profits. There is a whole swath of society that is actually the backbone of a new society that is progressive, that's going to lead us to economic opportunity for everybody rather than the elite. And that's where we have to invest our resources. So I do hope that Biden is going to do something similar to what was done by FDR during the Great Depression. And it'll be ideas about how we rebuild the society based on people, on real goods, on real services, on creativity, on stuff that changes knowledge and technology and innovation and makes us more skilled and more educated and more able to deal with racial and economic injustices and provide opportunity to everybody. Because the top 1% has become richer and wealthier, more successful. The bottom 50% is getting worse off. And situation of this degree of income and wealth inequality lead to revolution. You know, during the first and the second industrial revolution, there was the same increase in income and wealth inequality. And the enlightened bourgeois, like Keynes and others, realized we needed jobs, we needed worker rights, we needed minimum wage, we needed union, we need public pension, we need healthcare, we need education. And those societies who created the welfare state, the modern welfare state, reformed capitalism in a way that gave income and jobs and opportunity and rights to workers, and they avoided revolution. While in society it became more unequal, like Russia and China, then you had socialist and communist revolution. So capitalism and enlightened bourgeois and capitalists in the past, whether it's the UK or the US or Italy or Germany, realize we have to reform capitalism to make it successful for workers. If you do so, you can reform a market economy, have a mixed economy based on private sector and public services, and the government providing the public services like education, healthcare, skills, unemployment benefits, investment in science and technology, having health care, public pensions, retirement money, so that everybody is part of the same risk sharing. If you do it, we're in together, and we can have a thriving society that is united, where it's not just the individual, but the community. If we don't do it, eventually we have wars, we have revolution, we have unrest, and we have ugly stuff that's happening. Populism of the extreme right, sometimes a revolution of communism that don't lead to economic opportunity either. So we need a mixed economic system and a different economy and a different society, not based only on capital and entrepreneurs, but at its core as people and labor and workers and households and people who contribute to this world.
I got about 10 more questions, but I see you at your home, and we will ask then. Thank you,
So, yeah, and by the
Maybe
way,
we can continue another occasion or come to one of our events.
Part two.
One of these days,
yeah,
Jeffrey Sachs hosted a couple of concerts about climate change. In fact, maybe we'll bring him in. He's a friend of mine. So time being what it is, I just want to say, Nouriel.
Yeah, we have to wrap up because I have to leave in 4 minutes. So.
Right. So any last pressing questions? Anybody have any? And Nouriel's always really warm and generous spirit. So thank you for making the time. I really appreciate it. Anybody have a last little?
Well, I don't think we have time for the question because we have a poem at the end, and in 3 minutes I have to be gone.
I
so
do. Yeah,
I think we should stop here.
Exactly. I want to keep to Nouriel's time at 2:30. So I want to say thank you for such a brilliant conversation today, Nouriel. But as is our tradition, we end all of our conversations with a poetry reading. We've carried this over into these community events from when we used to, back in the day, all sit around a table and have lunch together in real life. But I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Alex Cuff, to the stage. Alex Cuff is a writer and public school teacher living in Brooklyn. Her chapbooks include Family, a Natural Wander, and I Try Out a Sentence to See Whether I Believe. She's a graduate of the Milton Avery School of the Arts at Bard College and co-founding editor of No Dear magazine. Without further ado, Alex, I'm handing the mic over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you so much to Paul and Nouriel for this conversation. I'm sad for it to end, and I hope that that there is a part two beyond this. Also, thanks to Catherine and Anselm for the invitation today. I'm going to read 3 poems. A Common Amnesia. White butcher paper wrapping the white bagel with white sesame seeds inside white wax paper. White spray paint tagging the framing store on Main Street. 6 white people in the bagel store. White napkins. The white Nissan sedan parked across the street. Leftover dirty white snow. Before 1691, the word white did not exist. The white help wanted sign in the bagel store window. Me, a white girl, sitting under the bright white light. That many things I do or do not do or say or do not say are related to this fact. The pistachio ice cream green, even though it is supposed to be white, white finding a way to be visible or invisible when it needs to be. Before 1691, the word white did not exist in a legal document. The white December sky, the white sign reading 5 miles, no passing, the white MacBook charger, soon to be obsolete, plugged into the white power strip, the white faux down comforter with ink stains and cat hair. In 1691, the word white was used for the first time in a legal document. Previously, the Christian and English indentured servants in Jamestown were referred to as Christian and English indentured servants, but then they were called white. The white light on the white windowsill, white comfort, white teachers, white intentions, white checks, always blank. Then the other indentured servants who did not have black or brown skin came to be called white. The white drugs, the white noise, all the white pages, the white backs of family pictures, the gray splinters of graves and the white blue snow, whiteness was extended to landless Europeans, separating their condition from those of African descent, encouraging them to hold their heads a little bit higher. I'd say it was a pretty successful move. Even today, I see some white folks holding their heads a little bit higher, even if they won't remember why. This next poem is an excerpt from a chapbook. I try out a sentence to see whether I believe, part of which was published in the Rail a couple years ago, so appreciate the editorial staff. It starts with a quote with from Adrian Rich. In America, we have only the present tense. I am in danger, you are in danger. I read a story about a man who struggles to support his consumptive wife with her long ropes of hair. I read a story about a man who struggles to support his consumptive wife and her long ropes of hair by digging graves and collecting scrap metal. I thought it was a bad story, but find myself wondering where I can get a wife with long ropes of hair. Consumptive or not, everyone I know is dying. I dye things green from my to-do list. I am in the produce aisle at Key Food. I am hushed by a man who has his hands deep in the bananas. I make synaptic space for future threats. I see sap in the trees, so I tap them. When I meet beautiful people with means, I think about meritocracy, citizenry, and survival of the fittest. I'm attracted to monotony. I still cannot truly say whether knowing the thing that afflicts can lessen the hold of the affliction. I could be asking the wrong questions. I reach into my bag and discover sharp items I'd written off as stolen. I lament that a beer glass is not the same as a glass of beer and go to the corner for a six-pack. I try out a sentence to see whether I believe. There are few reasons beyond intergenerational wealth that people are rich. I live in the city where people show signs of their richness, like not eating food if the food doesn't taste good, a one-way ticket to faraway places, like taking an apartment or not taking an apartment, working or not working. Privilege is rigid, but it's language like air. Imagine having everything you need for you and your pets, access to professionals, flaunted symmetries. There is no such thing as not having a past, but I've lived a long time in this way. I want to take responsibility for this choice of the present only, for this contribution to danger. I'm not saying that this is a poem. One could say that my father has lived ahistorically, did so when he protested the protesters of the Vietnam War. He was angry, could not see past the wealth of a few protesters, says, a bunch of spoiled rich kids, what did they know? I teach my students the letter A can be a prefix, and we look at the words atypical, atonal, asymptomatic. I have lived a long time unaware of my symptoms, like in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. In the 80s, I attend St. Joseph's Elementary School. I am a terrible student. The adults are dismayed. I work hard to memorize the definitions of treaty, egalitarianism, and democracy. I did not get the D in D-Day, could not memorize the causes and effects of World War I, who signed the Treaty of Versailles, who was the Archduke Ferdinand, and what did he have for breakfast on the morning of his assassination. I'm soothed by the intake process of any appointment. I want to sit across from someone in a professional relationship and believe they are the expert of my life. I will answer all their questions about age, medical history, sleep patterns, employment, and diet. Something about the limits of bureaucracy grant me permission to resign any effort to change anything outside whatever I have to do to arrive in that chair. I try out a sentence to see whether I believe. Not every hand on deck is necessary. I want things, and my destination subsumes the encounter. It doesn't matter that conspiracy is to breathe together, that insolence is to be brave, that darkness is to hold. We may be so satisfied, we never want to change a thing. Okay, and the last poem I'm gonna read is titled Possession. I exit the B train at Herald Square and step onto the escalator. I feel my heartbeat where I imagine my lungs should be and most likely are. Academics are talking about dispossession and the non-sovereign self as a political act. I am talking about a lack of self-possession as an involuntary act. I'm sweating into the bathtub, dependent on the magnesium to enter me through my largest organ since my large intestine is not absorbing nutrients. I self-perform a labia massage. I meditate on the intersection between the collective amnesia of settler colonialism and my own failing cognitive abilities to retain what I learn. I consider the relationships between absorption and waste removal, memory and courage. My memory is poor, thanks in part to explosions of cortisol at the mother's disappearing act. My body walks into a room and history's like, come on, hands me an L for effort. I've inherited a faulty memory from my parents, from my country. This land accumulates in my heart and in my pension to the teachers' union. I've stolen everything I'll ever call mine. Claudia Rankine says, white can't know what white feels. My white says, mine, 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 mine. Naturally, I am by my labors in cahoots. If I try out a sentence to see whether I believe and I do not believe, can I overturn the sentence? Probably. I study how to love my family outside the myth in which it's been sown. I give up on loving to understand and settle for loving to heal. A girl on the escalator with purple flowers and a suitcase. A girl on the bus in a yellow dress, flowers on the dress, and me counting all the flowers. Me in a lake, and from the lake, the only flowers are the umbrellas on shore and my small brain flower, and the warm piss between my legs, floral. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Alex. Snaps and claps in the virtual world. No, that was such a lovely way to end the event, and there's a lovely connection between you, Alex, and Nouriel being educators in your own respects. So thank you both for what you do. Nouriel had to leave, but I want to thank Paul for joining today. Thank you everyone for joining and for your questions. Before we go, I'd love to mention that the Rail is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. So please consider making a contribution to our anniversary fundraising campaign to keep all of our projects free, relevant, and independent. I'll post some links in the chat to check out. And if you can, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation between Ham Steinbach with Tom McGlynn and Anne C. Collins. We'll conclude with a poetry reading from Bridget Talone. You can now activate your microphones, everyone.
Oh, wait, hey, Nick, 1 second before everybody heads out. Just want to say thank you so much, Alex and Fong. It's always good to see you wearing those sunglasses. That's the fun part about putting these together. I just want to make sure everybody realizes that was a little bit of a different flavor. And I'm always trying to kind of think of art as a kind of omnivorous approach to things. So economics is tied to perception of market forces. Art is tied to all sorts of different potentialities. So I think the next one I'm doing with you guys is going to be with Jason Moran. He's a composer. He has an exhibition up at Loring Augustine now. And I just want to say, Alex, it was such a pleasure to hear your poem. And Nouriel's a wild guy. I mean, he's you know, I just felt like I had a little new chili there. You know, he was you know, mega spicy there. So just thanks everybody for making the time, and so many friends in the audience. And Nick, thanks for the moderation as well. So just wanted to put that in there. And a great 20th anniversary conversation. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, our pleasure and privilege of having you both. And for everyone in the audience, keep an eye on our events page for some of these upcoming events like Paul mentioned. But yeah, everyone can turn on their mics now and say hello and goodbye. And I hope you all, at least in the New York area, stay warm today and dry, but enjoy the snow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks,
Paul.
Thank you,
All right,
Alex.
thanks everybody.
Thank you,
All right,
Paul.
bye everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Alex.
Bravi,
Great
bravi.
poem, Alex.
Bye
Great
everybody.
films, Alex.